It's official. The long-expected announcement has come.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. America's comeback starts right now.
A comeback to what exactly? The likes of what we saw on January 6th when people attempted to topple the U.S. government at Donald Trump's bidding, because that event and the associated images need to be mentioned and shown every single time this candidacy is brought up, just as NPR did with their tweet last night. Breaking. Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. Every word is perfect and accurate, although I might have added a few details about his being twice impeached, saying his own vice president deserved to be hanged, that thing about there being fine people on both sides, and a few other related issues, but Musk still hasn't lifted Twitter's character limit. Thankfully, there are no such limits here. So for much more, I'm joined by Jennifer Horn. Jennifer is the former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project, political action committee formed by a group of prominent Republicans and former Republicans working to defeat Trumpism in the GOP, and Joe Malone, former Republican treasurer of Massachusetts. Joe and Jennifer, it's good to see you both. Thanks so much for being here. Jennifer, what did you think of the speech? Thanks. What did you think of the speech?
I thought it was surprisingly low energy. I thought that it was bizarre, dark. It didn't sound at all to me like somebody who saw what was great and, in his words, glorious about America. I think it was, everything about it was less than, underwhelming, fewer people. The whole thing was just bizarre. A ballroom at a Florida resort instead of a rally with 10,000 people. I mean, you go through a million little political setup details about it that were just wrong and dark and underwhelming.
So you've done a couple announcements yourself in your career, Joe Malone. What did you think of last night?
So more importantly than what I thought, people I'm talking to today, Republicans, they keep saying, if he had conducted himself that way for the stretch that he was in the White House versus being so bombastic and so much in the attack mode, that he might have had a better chance of getting reelected.
What'd you say back to them?
And my response was, I think he's taking advice, at least temporarily, that his old approach wasn't working. Try something different.
Well, one approach from his old approach that was embraced last night in his new approach, to use your friend's line, is there was an endless succession of lies. I mean, not close lies, not opinions, not rhetoric, immense lying. Does that bother people, or do they just say, well, that's who Trump is, he lies, get over it?
I think Americans, regardless of their party, have gotten used to politicians stretching the truth, lying, and I think Biden is very much a part of that. And, do
you ever lie like Donald Trump did last night? I mean, the ocean is going to rise 1/8 of an inch in 200 to 300 years, when in fact, just as one example, the National Ocean Service says it's going to rise 10 to 12 inches in 30 years. That's a pretty big deal.
I mean, do you believe that Joe Biden knew nothing about Hunter Biden?
We don't do that what about stuff here. My question is, does that trouble you at all?
I think Washington politicians have gotten very used to lying, and Trump is not an exception.
Why do you think Trump is running, Joe Malone?
I think a lot of it is about his own will, and call it ego, call it anything, but I do think that when he's attacking DeSantis, when DeSantis has got 2 weeks to go to the election for governor of Florida, it shows you he sees it too much about Donald Trump as opposed to something bigger.
My analysis, Jennifer, as to why he's running, and obviously I don't know, is when and if he's indicted by Merrick Garland or in Georgia, he will say, I was only indicted because I'm a candidate for president that they fear is going to win, and hope that people don't know the investigation's going on for years. Why do you think he made the decision?
Well, first, let me just respond to something very quickly that you guys were just talking about a second ago.
Sure.
It was lie upon lie upon lie. And Joe's right. The American people have sort of reached a point where they're just sort of like, oh, my God, these guys are all lying. But it's so bad. It's so dangerous. And Donald Trump doesn't lie about, I'm going to cut taxes 2%, and he doesn't try to cut them at all. This man inspired and fueled an insurrection against America. He inspired violence against his own vice president. People died in that attempted coup. Nobody should ever brush off Donald Trump's attempt at the presidency as, just like all the other guys. He's nothing like the other guys. He's extremely dangerous.
Forget the why question then. How do you respond to what Jennifer said? And how do you speak for your friends, too, your Republican friends? How do they and you respond to the insurrection?
So I would say this. I voted for Donald Trump twice. I have a real problem with January 6th in terms of his, not only that it was a black mark on America, black mark on his presidency, but it was also a case that he's damaged goods now. And when you see someone like DeSantis, who I think is going to be a fabulous candidate, why not go with him as opposed to someone who's going to make the job of winning the White House back for the Republicans much more difficult?
So you done with Trump?
You know what? I am. And I would go one step further to say, I think this president needs to be replaced and replaced quickly. I mean, he's a guy who doesn't have the cognitive skills.
Okay, we'll talk about Joe Biden next time.
So my point is, I want to see a Republican get elected.
Fine. Were you going to say something there, Jennifer, or no?
Yeah, look, I have a lot of respect for Joe, but this is exactly, he's
Wait,
right.
We're talking about Joe Biden or Joe Malone?
Joe Malone.
Okay, fine. I just want to be clear.
And Joe Biden.
Okay,
Let me tell you, and Joe Biden. But what Joe Malone is talking about is exactly right. The Republican Party is going to try to package this as Trump was great when we had him. Time to move on to DeSantis. Is DeSantis really the better guy, or is he just Donald Trump in a more refined package? Until the Republican Party completely rejects Trumpism and banishes the whole anti-democracy wing of the party, then it doesn't matter if it's Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump or anybody else or Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. It's the same position, the same danger that we are presented to as a nation.
Well, beyond the Trumpism, as you call it, of Ron DeSantis, there are other hugely popular governors at home. One of them was the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush. And on the national stage, not so much. And DeSantis hasn't done that yet. Jennifer, staying with you for a second, the only member of Congress who was there last night was Matthew Cawthorn, who not only was defeated in his most recent election, but is also accused of essentially misappropriating hundreds of thousands of dollars. The New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch, used to be a big Trump supporter, very powerful guy in Republican circles, had a headline in the New York Post. You can see at the bottom, Florida man makes announcement on page 26. Do those things matter when you have a huge, even though he didn't have a huge personality last night, when you're a huge presence like Donald Trump is, does it matter if powerful media like Fox News, like the Post, like the Wall Street Journal abandon him? Does it matter if members of Congress jump away? Or at the end of the day, is it just all about Trump?
Well, for Trump, it's always all about Trump. If people have not read the New York Post announcement, they must. It is hysterical. It will be the bright light of your day. However, does it matter if the media abandons you? To some degree, I think it does. There's no question that in 2016, a lot of Trump's personality and all was built up by the free media that he got. And we saw that in 2020, he didn't get quite so much of that. But what's more important is what will Donald Trump do to keep his base, and what will the Republican Party leadership do to try to take his base away from him?
What will they do? What will they do? Is there any evidence that they'll do anything?
But as I say, so far, everyone's talking about how they're starting to kind of step away from Trump and they're trying to reprimand Trump and this sort of thing. There have been zero indications that the Republican Party or its leadership is ready to reject Trump internally. Trump raises money. Trump keeps their primary voters, riled up and ready to take action. Trump can attack and destroy any individual sitting Republican in Congress. As long as they're afraid to stand up to Trump publicly and aggressively, we're still going to have the party of Trump, whether he's president or not.
Are you troubled, Joe Malone? I read at the top the tweet that NPR put out last night. Now there's a big move on Twitter, hashtag defund NPR. Margaret Sullivan, a former ombudsman, media critic at the Washington Post and New York Times, has said the media gave a free ride to Donald Trump in 2016. I think they did. Not only does places like CNN, which is my cable channel of choice, broadcast speeches from beginning to end, they'd have video, live video of the lectern that's empty, waiting for Donald Trump to come. Everything NPR said is true. Should that not be the way every time he speaks, he's reintroduced the American public?
In terms
insurrectionist, somebody who attempted to lead an overthrow, somebody who's been
Twice
impeached twice.
So I guess that's the case, but
Well, it is the case factually.
Should you be doing that with every politician? Should Ted Kennedy have been, Chappaquiddick, he left a woman there to drown? I don't know. As long as there's an even playing field, whether it's, because once you start that precedent where it's, I don't like his ideology, so we're going to name all the bad things.
It's not about ideology. It's a recitation of facts.
But it's a slippery slope.
How about it? Is it a slippery slope, Jennifer Horn?
Not at all. It's not at all a slippery slope. Nobody's saying introduce him as the guy who's been married 3 times, or the guy who was mean to his kid, or the guy who, kicks puppies. They're saying this is the guy who inspired and fueled a violent, deadly attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. The only thing that compares to that in the United States, government history is the start of the Civil War. I don't understand how anybody can look at what Donald Trump brought, the precipice to which he led our nation, and think that he's just like everybody else.
How about
if somebody else,
let Joe respond to that if I can,
if there's another candidate out there
but
who's
Jennifer,
been twice impeached, they should be introduced that way too.
How about it,
So
Joe?
Jennifer, put Bob Smith's name as opposed to Donald Trump. Once the media gets into this selectivity of, we're going to say this person, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, did these things wrong, but we're not going to say it about this other person. Where does that come into play? I don't get it. Why wouldn't?
I don't think that should come into play. They should both. Everyone should be treated equally. If there are other people who led violent
one at a time, Jennifer, then
they
Joe.
should be identified.
But Jennifer, you're talking about the insurrection, quote unquote, as if that has been signed, sealed, delivered. It was an ugly moment. We don't even know what Trump's role was in the whole thing.
Wait, you don't. What do you think Trump's role was in the whole thing? You saw what he had to say. You've watched the January 6th hearings.
I'm not privy to all of the information that's come out. You have Republicans who are saying, why wouldn't they let the minority leader? Why wouldn't they let McCarthy put his 2 people on there? Instead, the Speaker said, no, I'm going to choose the 2 people.
John Malone, Steve Scalise, who's one of the ranking Republicans, has said publicly Nancy Pelosi did absolutely nothing. And then we see a video where Nancy Pelosi is on the phone to the governor of Virginia, the vice president of the United States, and you know who's standing right next to her while she's having those phone conversations? Steve Scalise, who said she did nothing.
But my point is that she put Kinzinger on there, and she put Liz
Cheney, we call her, yeah.
Thank you very much. She put those 2 on there because she knew where they were coming from, and they hated Trump.
Kevin McCarthy was offered seats on the January 6th.
My only point, Jim, and you don't like hearing this, but if you're going to list all of these things about Trump or anybody else, you better be willing to say, Joe
what
Biden,
other president has
ABCD.
attempted to lead an insurrection to overthrow a democratic election?
One other president has had a son who's taken millions of dollars from China.
What about
I don't know. You
know what troubles me most, Jennifer, about the Trump conversation, and you've been relentless. A lot of your colleagues have too. To me, the issue and most troubling is not Trump. The issue is that there are still tens of millions of Americans who are fine with a guy, in fact, in love with a guy who traded in racism, misogyny, insurrectionism, I would argue is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, because to him, the COVID crisis was a PR crisis, not a public health crisis. How do you explain the lingering attachment that is really deep with so many people in the Republican Party in this country?
I can't explain it for every one of the millions and millions of Americans out there who still embrace what they think or who they think Donald Trump is. But when it comes, one of the biggest problems with that is that all of those tens of millions of people have credibly elected members of the Senate and the House who embrace what they're saying, who are election deniers, who would vote for Trump again if he becomes the nominee of the party. It's not because I left the party, but because it is their responsibility. It falls on Republican Party leadership to fix this problem.
You have 30-second response, Joe Malone.
Jennifer, all I'm saying, this is not a defense of Trump. It is a level playing field that has to exist. And when you have an administration who's saying the border is sealed, and the media doesn't say, wait a minute, we got all these people coming over the border. The border isn't
I have a
sealed.
compromise.
That
How about
is a
that?
lie.
So, like Mike Pence, when we talk about him, we should say the guy who Donald Trump thought should be hanged on January 6th.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that good?
again,
Excellent.
Jim, I understand.
to
It's
see you.
indefensible.
Joe Malone, appreciate it. Jennifer Horn, as always, got to go. Thank you both
Always
so
good.
much.